I still remember the weight of that wedding invitation in my hand, like it carried more than paper and ink. It carried years. Years of calls that went unanswered. Years of birthdays I was told he was too busy to attend. Years of silence that I learned to swallow like dust. My son's wedding. Even saying it out loud felt strange, like I was borrowing a life that had slowly stopped including me. It was held at a high-end estate just outside the city, the kind of place where the gates open too smoothly, where the grass looks like it's never known a rough step, and where every guest seems to already know which version of themselves they are supposed to be. I wasn't sure which version of myself I was supposed to be that day. A plumber in a room full of executives, investors, and polished smiles. That's what I was. That's what I had always been. A plumber for 32 years. Early mornings, frozen pipes in winter, sewage backups nobody thanks you for fixing, emergency calls at 2 a.m. when everyone else is asleep in their warm beds. It built my life. It also kept me out of my son's. I told myself that wasn't true when he was younger, that he would understand one day. That hard work speaks for itself. That dignity doesn't need applause. But standing outside that estate gate, watching luxury cars roll in one after another, I felt something I rarely allowed myself to feel. Small. Still, I straightened my jacket. Not expensive, not tailored, just clean. I had ironed it twice that morning, as if wrinkles were the only thing I could control. Inside, the music was soft, the kind that doesn't demand attention but assumes it already has it. Waiters moved like they were part of the decoration. Conversations floated in polite laughter that never fully reached the eyes. And then I saw him, my son. He was standing near the center of it all, not as a boy anymore, not even as the teenager who used to sit on my truck's passenger seat complaining about early mornings. He stood like a man who had learned how to occupy space without apologizing for it. I felt something tighten in my chest, something I hadn't prepared for. Pride, yes, but also distance. A strange kind of grief that arrives even during celebration. I took a step forward, ready to call his name, but he didn't see me yet. Instead, I heard him laugh. A clean, controlled laugh. The kind people use when they want to sound effortless in front of others. He was talking to a group near the Floral arch. I caught fragments first. Finance. Opportunities. Someone mentioning expansion, another mentioning family legacy like it was a brand. Then I heard my name. Not directly, not warmly, just referenced in passing, like something from a life that didn't quite fit the setting. "That's his dad," someone said. A pause. Then my son's voice followed, casual, almost amused. "Yeah, he's just a plumber." The words didn't land immediately. My brain repeated them first, like it was trying to translate a language it used to understand but had forgotten. Just a plumber. There it was, reduced, flattened, packaged into something small enough to hand to strangers without explanation. I felt the air shift around me, not in the room, in me. I didn't move at first. I stood near the edge of the crowd, partially hidden behind a tall floral arrangement, watching him continue talking as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just been quietly erased in front of 200 guests. Someone laughed at his comment. A polite laugh, the kind that agrees without thinking. My hands stayed still. I noticed that. How still they were. I've used these hands to fix broken pipes in basements flooded with sewage, to tighten valves in freezing weather, until my fingers stopped feeling like mine. And yet in that moment, they felt useless. Just a plumber. I repeated it silently. Not because it was new, but because of who said it. My son. I thought back, suddenly without permission, to a younger version of him, sitting on the kitchen floor, turning bolts from my toolbox into toys, asking me how water knows where to go, falling asleep on my shoulder after long nights when I came home smelling like metal and work. There was a time when just a plumber would have sounded strange to him, not insulting, just incomplete. Because I wasn't just anything in his world back then, or so I thought. A server walked past me, offering champagne. I shook my head without looking at him. The music swelled slightly for the entrance of the bride's family. People shifted positions, adjusting smiles, adjusting posture. Everything in this place seemed adjustable except me. I should have walked away then. That would have been simple, clean, no scene, no disruption. But something kept me there. Maybe it was the way he stood, confident, comfortable, like he had never questioned where he came from. Or maybe it was the realization that I had spent my entire life building something I thought he would be proud of, only to discover he had rewritten the meaning of it without telling me. The ceremony was about to begin. Guests were being guided toward their seats. The chatter softened into expectation. I found a seat near the back, not assigned, just available. No one asked questions. That's another thing about rooms like this. If you look like you belong somewhere quiet, people let you stay quiet. From where I sat, I could see him clearly now. My son. He adjusted his cufflinks, smiled for a camera, leaned slightly toward a guest who was saying something I couldn't hear, and again I felt it. That phrase echoing in my mind, like it had taken root. Just a plumber. I didn't feel anger at first. That surprised me. What I felt was something heavier, recognition. Because deep down, I realized something I had avoided for years. To him, I had become a background detail, a story that didn't quite match the life he was building. The ceremony music changed. People began to rise, and that was when he turned slightly, his eyes scanning the crowd, and for a brief moment, they landed on me. There was no shock on his face, no warmth either, just acknowledgement. And then, without hesitation, he said it again, louder this time, as if introducing a fact that needed no further meaning. Like I said, he's just a plumber. A few heads turned, a few more polite laughs followed. Something inside me went still, not broken, still. I smiled, stood up, and that was the moment everything changed. I didn't sit back down. That was the first thing I noticed about myself as I stood there in that room, full of polished faces and soft fabric chairs. My body had made a decision before my thoughts fully caught up. My son was still looking in my direction, but not really at me. It was the kind of glance people give when they've already categorized you, stored you somewhere safe in their mind so they don't have to reconsider you again. Just a plumber. I kept smiling. Not because I felt like smiling, but because I understood something in that moment that I didn't understand a minute before. If I let my face show what I was feeling, I would lose control of everything that came after. And I wasn't ready to lose control. The ceremony was supposed to begin, but something in the air shifted. Small pauses started forming between movements. Guests who had been settling into their seats were now watching me more than the front. That's the thing about moments like this. People pretend they're invisible until someone breaks the pattern. I stepped forward. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. I could feel eyes following me, like threads pulling tight across the room. The music continued softly, unaware that something else had taken center stage without permission. My son finally turned fully toward me now. A slight frown touched his face. Not confusion, more like inconvenience. "Dad," he said, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "you should sit. We're starting." There it was again. That tone, not disrespectful enough for strangers to react, but just sharp enough for me to feel it. I nodded slightly, as if acknowledging him. Then I kept walking, toward the front. A few people shifted uncomfortably. I heard a whisper somewhere behind me. Someone asking who I was. Someone else answering again. "He's just the plumber." The phrase traveled faster this time. Not as laughter, as definition. I reached the edge of the aisle where guests were lined on both sides. The bride's family on one side, my son's new world on the other. And suddenly, I realized something else. I didn't recognize most of the faces on my own son's side. Not really. There were men in expensive suits who looked like they measured success in silence. Women wearing jewelry that didn't need introduction. People who had likely never held a wrench in their lives unless it was symbolic. And yet, they all seemed to know each other. Except me. My son stepped forward slightly now, lowering his voice. "Dad, this isn't the time," he said. "Please, just go sit down." Not anger, not panic. Control. That was what he was trying to maintain. Control of the narrative. Control of the room. Control of how I appeared in it. I stopped walking. For a moment, everything slowed. The music, the movement, even the light through the tall windows seemed to pause. I looked at him properly now, not as a boy I raised, but as a man I was suddenly meeting for the first time in a very long time. "You said something about me," I said quietly. My voice didn't carry far, but it didn't need to. He frowned. "What?" "You said I was just a plumber." A few guests nearby went still, not fully understanding yet, but sensing something forming. He exhaled through his nose. A small laugh, controlled again. "Dad, don't do this here." There it was. Not denial. Dismissal. As if my reaction was the problem. Not the statement itself. Something inside me tightened. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. I had spent years thinking I was invisible, because I was overlooked. But standing there, I realized something more precise. I wasn't invisible. I was inconvenient. There's a difference. The kind of difference that changes how a man stands in a room. I looked around slowly. 200 guests, soft lighting, perfect arrangement. A ceremony built on image, reputation, and curated respectability. And I understood something else. None of this had been built with me in mind. Not even as a footnote. My son stepped closer now, lowering his voice further. "Please, you're embarrassing yourself." That word landed differently. Not because it was new, because it was familiar. I had heard versions of it my entire life, without it ever being said directly. Don't show up like that. Don't talk like that. Don't look like that. Don't be that in this setting. Embarrassing. I nodded slowly again, and then I said something I didn't plan. "Do you know what I did this morning before I came here?" He blinked. A pause. The room around us stayed frozen in attention now. Even the music seemed irrelevant. "I fixed a burst pipe in a basement 2 miles from here," I continued. "An elderly woman's home. Water was flooding her floor. She didn't have insurance. She was crying because she thought she'd lose everything she had left." My voice stayed even. "I didn't charge her." A few guests shifted again. Someone lowered their phone slightly, unsure whether to record or not. My son's expression changed, just slightly. Not guilt. Annoyance mixed with discomfort. "Dad, this is not—" I raised my hand gently. Not to silence him, just to continue. "I know what you think this is," I said. "But I didn't come here to make a scene." A pause. "I came here because I was invited as your father." That word hung in the air longer than anything else. Father. Not plumber. Not background detail. Father. For the first time I saw something flicker in his face. Not softening, but recognition that something was slipping outside his control. The room waited, and I realized the moment had already passed the point of being reversible. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy in a way that made people shift in their seats without realizing why. The kind of silence that exposes how loud a room really is, when nobody knows what to do next. My son stood in front of me now, no longer just embarrassed. There was tension in his jaw that wasn't there before. The kind that comes when someone realizes they are not fully in control of a moment they carefully designed. "Dad," he said again, but softer this time. Less performance, more warning. "Stop, please." That please wasn't kindness, it was containment. I understood that now. Everything in this room had been carefully arranged to tell a story. Today was supposed to be about him, about success, about arrival, about a new chapter where nothing messy from the past followed into the future, and I was the part that didn't fit the frame. I looked at him for a long moment, not the way I used to look at him when he was a child needing guidance, not the way I used to look at him when he was still mine in a way he hasn't been for years, but the way a man looks when he realizes he has been reduced inside someone else's story. "I'm not here to embarrass you," I said quietly. A pause. "But I won't disappear just because my presence makes your story harder to explain." That line landed differently. I saw a shift in the nearby guests. Subtle. A few heads turning slightly more toward him now instead of me. The dynamic was changing without anyone announcing it. My son noticed too. His voice lowered. "You're making this about you." That was almost enough to make me smile again. Almost. Because that was exactly what had already been done. I took a slow breath and turned slightly, just enough so my voice could carry to the nearest rows of guests. "I didn't plan to speak," I said, "but since we're already here," a pause, "I want to clear something up." The room tightened again. I could feel it. 200 people holding their breath in different ways. "I've been called many things in my life," I continued. "Most of them don't matter, but one thing I've never been ashamed of is my work." I glanced down at my hands for a second. Rough, marked, honest. I fix what breaks. Pipes, systems, messes people don't want to look at. I go into places most people avoid, and I make them livable again. A few people shifted again, this time less uncomfortable, more attentive. "I am a plumber," I said. No hesitation. Then I looked directly at my son. "And that is not an insult." A silence followed that felt sharper than before. Because now the word had been reclaimed. Not as a dismissal, but as identity. My son's expression tightened. I could see the struggle now. Not between anger and calm, between image and reality. He stepped closer again, voice lower, controlled but strained. "This isn't the time or place," he said again. "People are watching." I nodded slightly. "Yes," I said. "They are." That was the turning point. Because now it was no longer about a private misunderstanding between father and son. It had become public interpretation, and people were no longer watching me as just a plumber. They were watching him. Something in the bride's side shifted. I saw a few family members lean in slightly, whispering, not aggressively, observationally, the way people do when they are adjusting their understanding of someone in real time. My son noticed that too. His posture changed subtly, a tightening in his shoulders. He tried again, quieter. "Dad, you're ruining this day." That word again. Ruining. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not defense. A kind of acceptance I hadn't fully allowed before. Because for years, I had believed my absence made things easier. But now I understood something worse. My presence had always been the inconvenient truth. "I didn't come here to ruin anything," I said. My voice stayed steady. "I came here because I thought I still belonged in your life." A pause. "And I'm starting to understand I was wrong about how much space I actually have in it." That line changed the air. Even my son froze slightly. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was accurate. Too accurate. A chair shifted somewhere behind us. Someone exhaled slowly. The ceremony itself felt suspended, like time had agreed to wait until this was resolved. My son finally spoke again, but the control was slipping now. "You don't understand how this looks," he said, and I nodded. For the first time, not to him, but to myself. "I understand perfectly," I said. A pause. "I understand that in your world, I am something you explain away, instead of someone you stand beside." That landed harder than anything before it. Because it wasn't loud, it was final in tone. And for the first time I saw something in his face that wasn't irritation. It was uncertainty. Not about me, about how the room now saw him. And that was the part he couldn't control. Not anymore. The room had fully changed now. Not in noise, not in movement, but in something far more permanent, the way people look at a situation once they realize it's no longer a performance, but a truth unfolding in real time. My son stood there, and for the first time since I had walked in, he wasn't speaking like someone leading the day. He was reacting. And there's a difference people can feel even if they don't say it out loud. The bride stood slightly behind him now. I could see her watching both of us carefully, her expression controlled but no longer passive. Her family, once relaxed and celebratory, had shifted into quiet assessment. Everyone was recalculating. My son turned back to me, voice lower than before. "This isn't fair." That word, fair. I almost let out a breath that might have sounded like laughter if it had escaped fully, because fairness wasn't what had brought us here. Years of absence don't arrive evenly. They accumulate quietly, like dust in corners nobody notices until the light changes. "I didn't come here to compete with you," I said. A pause. "I came because I thought we still had something that didn't need competition." That hit differently. Not loud, not emotional. Just true enough to settle into the room. I saw his jaw tighten again, but the edge was gone now, replaced by something less stable, uncertainty. And underneath that, something harder to admit. Recognition. Because deep down, he knew I wasn't lying. He just didn't know what to do with it in front of everyone. The officiant had stepped back slightly during all of this, unsure whether to intervene or wait it out. Even the music had fully stopped now. No one had bothered to restart it. 200 guests were no longer watching a ceremony begin. They were watching a fracture reveal itself. I exhaled slowly. And then I did something I hadn't planned at all when I walked into that estate. I turned slightly toward the guests again. Not to perform, not to defend, but to close something that had quietly been open for too long. "I won't stay where I'm only tolerated in silence," I said. My voice was calm, not raised, not dramatic, just final in a way that didn't invite negotiation. A few people shifted again. Someone lowered their gaze. Someone else looked toward my son. He noticed that. Of course he did. His world was built on perception, and perception was no longer stable. "Dad," he said quickly, stepping forward one last time. "Don't do this." But this time, I didn't stop. "I spent my life fixing things," I said, looking at him directly now. "Pipes, systems, leaks, breakdowns." A pause. "But there are some things you don't fix by staying longer in the damage." Silence. That was the moment it landed fully. Not as argument, as decision. I reached into my jacket slowly. Not dramatically, not like a reveal, just naturally, like someone retrieving something they already knew they would use. I placed the wedding invitation on the edge of a nearby table. It felt lighter now than it did when I first received it. Not because it changed, because I had. "I wish you well," I said, looking at my son. No anger left in my voice. No pleading either. Just distance. The kind that doesn't try to hurt anyone. It just stops reaching. For a moment he didn't respond. Not immediately. And in that pause, I saw something I hadn't seen in him earlier. Not arrogance, not control, not embarrassment, but the beginning of understanding what it costs when someone who has always been there decides not to stay in the background anymore. I turned away before he could find words that would try to undo it. The room didn't stop me. No one did. Because everyone understood in their own way that something had already ended before I even moved. I walked back down the aisle slowly. Not rushed, not dramatic, no final look back. Just a man leaving a place where he had finally been seen clearly enough to stop pretending he wasn't. Behind me, I heard nothing. And somehow, that silence said more than anything spoken earlier. Outside the estate gates, The air felt different. Not better, just honest. I stood there for a moment, looking back at the building where my son's new chapter was supposed to begin. And I realized something I hadn't expected to feel. I wasn't losing him in that moment. I had already been losing him for years. That day just made it visible. I adjusted my jacket, took one slow breath, and started walking. Not away from a wedding, away from an illusion I had held on to longer than I should have. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking behind anyone else's story. I was walking in my own.